Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we've got an absolute masterclass lined up for you. We are going to deconstruct the foundational principles of one of the most brilliant industrial minds in human history. We're diving deep into Henry Ford's incredible book, Today and Tomorrow, and we're zeroing in specifically on Part 3, Innovation and Overcoming Tradition. If you're out there managing operations, building products, or you just want to understand the pure architecture of extreme efficiency, well, you are in exactly the right place.
Welcome to Bodhi Unified Flow. Here we simplify complexity and amplify performance. Our whole goal with this explainer is to take these massive, historically proven concepts and hand them to you so directly and clearly that you can actually apply them to your own workflows the minute we're done here. Right, so before we jump in, let's look at exactly what you're going to take away from our session today. By the end of this explainer, you're going to fully understand Ford's, frankly, disruptive philosophy on tradition. You'll learn the actual, practical mechanics of eliminating waste, and we're talking about waste as a failure of engineering, not just simple cost-cutting. You'll also grasp his true, totally counterintuitive definition of standards, and finally, we're going to explore this brilliant concept he called the wage motive. And to hit those objectives, here is our roadmap. We're moving through 6 key sections. We'll start with the philosophy of innovation, followed by overcoming industrial tradition. Then we look at learning from waste, redefining standards and time, and the wage motive, before wrapping the whole thing up with our summary and references. All right, let's dive into this.
The philosophy of innovation.
To really understand Ford's system, you've got to start with his mindset. He honestly believed that the only tradition worth keeping in industry is the tradition of good work. Everything else, every process, every method, every established norm, it's all purely experimental. I love this quote because it just brilliantly captures his whole vibe. Our invariable reply to "it can't be done" is "go do it." Ford would literally bypass his own technical experts to lead new operations. Why? Because the experts simply knew way too many things that supposedly couldn't be done. When faced with a limitation that was just based on how we've always done it, Ford demanded action. He proved that true progress absolutely requires dismantling your assumptions.
Think about it like this. If you view tradition as a fixed rule, your progress just stops dead. But if you view tradition merely as the current stage of an ongoing experiment, suddenly the possibilities are endless. Ford made it clear that even if they reached a stage in production that seemed downright remarkable, it was still just a stage, nothing more. He knew for a fact that far greater changes were always coming. We really have to look at every single process we use in manufacturing today as just an experiment waiting to be improved.
Section 2. Overcoming industrial tradition. So let's look at a profound distinction Ford makes here. It's the difference between the hand concept and the machine concept. Let's take plate glass making as an example. For centuries, glass was melted in these clay pots built by hand and actually kneaded by bare feet. Now, the traditional easy path of innovation would just be to build a machine that mimics the human hand, right? Like a mechanical arm to carry the pot or polish the glass. But Ford said, no, that is not true innovation. The machine concept means you have to start from the very beginning. You redesign the entire process so it can be done completely by machinery. In this new world, the human isn't replaced by a mechanical hand. The human becomes an attendant, a master of the machine itself. And when you look at how this plays out in reality, the machine concept is stunning. The crucial point of Ford's production is that you bring the work to the man, not the man to the work. By doing this one thing, you eliminate an absolutely massive waste of human energy and time. Your workers aren't wandering around the factory floor searching for tools or parts. The tools and parts flow directly to them through a highly streamlined assembly line. It's a complete game changer.
Section 3. Learning from waste.
Now for Ford, waste was not just some annoying accounting problem. It was a fundamental engineering failure. Just take a look at this sequence. It's absolutely fascinating. Back then, wood steering wheels were incredibly wasteful because you could only use the absolute finest wood, which left a mountain of scrap. Meanwhile, out on Ford's farm in Dearborn, tons of straw were just rotting away, totally wasted. So what do his engineers do? They experiment. They actually gathered that waste straw, processed it chemically, and invented a brand new material they called Fordite. It looked and acted a lot like hard rubber, and get this, it was used to manufacture about 45 different car parts, including the rim of the steering wheel. They literally engineered farm waste into a high-value material. How cool is that?
And the sheer scale of what they achieved, just by looking closely at their scrap, is mind-blowing. By simply changing the dimensions of untrimmed steel sheets and cutting them a little more efficiently, they saved 4 million pounds of steel scrap every single year on crankcases alone. Think about that volume.
By slightly altering the cutting angle of windshield brackets just by 7 degrees, they saved 1.5 million pounds of steel. And by making steering bushings half as thick, because their rigorous testing proved they worked exactly as well, they saved 130,000 pounds of bronze. You see, these weren't some massive futuristic technological leaps. They were meticulous, waste-driven engineering optimizations.
But of course, Ford wanted to push it even further. He didn't just want to salvage his waste, he wanted to design a system where salvage was completely unnecessary. His plants were generating huge amounts of scrap hardwood and paper, so they just built a paper mill. Now, the experts at the time said, "You can't make paper from hardwood." Well, Ford did it anyway. They started using 20 tons of scrap paper a day to produce binder board. In fact, his labs developed a special waterproof board with such immense tensile strength that a simple 10-inch strip of it could bear the entire suspended weight of a Ford car. Simply incredible.
Section 4. Redefining standards and time.
So the big takeaway here is that innovation is born from analyzing your waste. But to keep progressing, you have to challenge literally everything you know about industrial baselines. Even today, a lot of people think of standardization as this rigid, confining rule that kills creativity. Ford saw it entirely differently. He defined standardization not as a barricade, but as the absolute necessary foundation on which tomorrow's improvement will be based. If you think of a standard simply as the best way we know how to do this today, it becomes a springboard. You lock in today's best practice, so your engineers are freed up to go figure out tomorrow's big breakthrough.
And standardizing those processes is exactly what allows you to master time. Look at this deeply integrated transportation cycle. Ford looked at raw material sitting in a warehouse and didn't see safety stock like most managers do. He saw wasted live money. To eliminate that, Ford integrated the entire supply chain. Iron ore was mined, shipped via the Great Lakes, arrived directly at the docks of his massive Rouge plant, was processed straight into steel, built into a vehicle, and then departed via their own railroad. It was a state of total continuous flow.
Which leads us to this absolutely jaw-dropping metric, 81. Under Henry Ford's fully optimized, highly integrated system, it took exactly 81 hours from the exact moment raw iron ore was dug out of the earth to the moment it became a finished, running automobile driving off the line. That's just over 3 days. That, my friends, is the power of eliminating wasted time and treating your material flow like a continuous, unstoppable river. Section 5. The wage motive. But listen, none of this incredible machinery or supply chain mastery matters without the human element. And this brings us to perhaps Ford's most profound and honestly most misunderstood philosophy. Ford genuinely believed that the core purpose of business is service, not just profit. He called this the wage motive. It dictates that you have to design a product specifically to help people. Furthermore, you need to view your own workers as your best potential customers. In a move that shocked the world at the time, Ford doubled his workers' wages while simultaneously cutting the price of his cars in half. He knew that by paying men exceptionally well, he'd attract the absolute best talent, drive unprecedented productivity, and practically build a prosperous middle class that could actually afford to buy the very products they were building on the line.
And he firmly believed in creating a physical environment that was actually worthy of that top-tier talent. Ford heavily invested in decentralized, exceptionally clean, hydro-powered facilities. He was an absolute stickler for spotless work environments. He believed that absolute cleanliness allowed a person to learn to respect their tools, their surroundings, and ultimately, themselves.
This whole philosophy really stems from his deep underlying optimism about technology. As this quote beautifully captures, the function of the machine is to liberate man from brute burdens and release his energies to the building of his intellectual and spiritual powers. You see, Ford did not see machines as something that enslaved humanity. He saw them as tools that amplify human potential, shifting all the backbreaking wear and tear from human hands directly onto steel and iron.
Section 6. Summary and references.
All right, we have covered an immense amount of ground today on the true architecture of industrial greatness. Let's look back at our learning objectives. We've seen how tradition absolutely must be disrupted by continuous experimentation. We learn how true efficiency involves engineering waste into entirely new value, like turning farm straw into steering wheels. We redefine standards not as barricades holding us back, but as the mandatory springboards for tomorrow's improvements. And finally, we explored how high wages aren't just a business expense, but the ultimate economic driver of a prosperous ecosystem.
On the screen, you'll find our cited references for today's explainer, primarily drawn directly from the commemorative edition of Henry Ford's Today and Tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me today at Bodhi Unified Flow. I want to leave you with one final provocative question to chew on as you head back to your own operations. What is the biggest, most stubborn limitation in your industry right now, and how are you going to reply to the phrase, "it can't be done," with Go do it.